The average American plans to retire at 66. They actually exit the workforce at 61. That gap is not a lifestyle choice. It is a layoff, a health scare, a reorganization, a caregiving crisis that arrived ahead of schedule, and by the time it lands, the window to restructure the finances is already gone. There are three numbers that define why 48 is different from every other age on the calendar. And the first one will change how you think about the next 12 months. 77% of your retirement outcome is determined by the first 10 years of retirement. Not your total contributions, not your average return, the sequence of what happens in that first decade. Which means the decisions you make in the 7 to 10 years before retirement, right now, if you are 48 set that sequence, ignore this window and the math calculates itself. Not in your favor. Here's the thing. There is no cultural moment around 48. Nobody makes a movie about it. Nobody throws a big party. 40 is when you panic. 50 is when you pretend you've accepted it. 60 is when the consequences of the previous 2 decades start showing up on a spreadsheet. But 48 is the actual inflection point. The last year where peak earnings, meaningful compounding runway, structural tax flexibility, and pre-force exit time all exist simultaneously. That combination, that specific overlap of conditions does not exist at 45 because you haven't hit peak earnings yet. It does not exist at 52 because you've already entered the high-risk sequence window. It exists right here, right now, at this exact age. What I want to show you today is the complete architecture of the 48-year-old's financial situation. Not motivational, not generic. I'm going to walk you through 4 specific dynamics: why your earnings are at their structural peak, why the compounding math changes in a way that is not linear but exponential, why more than half of workers who think they're safely employed get involuntarily pushed out before they plan to retire, and why the 7 years between now and your mid-50s are not simply more accumulation years, but a fundamentally different strategic phase that requires a fundamentally different plan. Miss any one of these, and the math quietly works against you in a way you will not notice until it is too late to reverse it. There's a concept in aerospace called escape velocity. It is the minimum speed a rocket needs to reach to break free from a planet's gravitational pull. Earth's escape velocity is 11.2 kilometers per second. Go slower than that, and the rocket eventually loops back, no matter the design of the engine, no matter the quality of the fuel. Gravity wins. Your financial life has an escape velocity too. Not from your employer, not from the market, from the specific mechanics of time, compounding, and tax. Drag that together constitute gravity in this context. The burn phase, the period where your decisions actually determine trajectory, runs from roughly 45 to 55. 48 sits at the center of that window. By the time I'm done explaining why, the metaphor will feel less like a motivational poster and more like a structural diagram. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you a dynamic that most financial content never touches: the hidden intersection between involuntary exit risk and sequence of returns risk, and how those two forces combine to unravel plans that look perfectly reasonable on a spreadsheet. But first, let me show you why your best financial asset right now is also hiding your biggest structural blind spot. According to ADP payroll data, which covers more than 110 million active payroll records, the peak median wage in America belongs to workers in the 45 to 54 age bracket. The median for that group is $97,600, the highest of any age group in the data set. PayScale's research gets even more specific. College-educated men experience pay growth for nearly a decade longer than most other groups, with earnings peaking around age 49 at a typical salary of around $90,000. Federal Reserve data confirms the same pattern. Households between 45 and 54 earn a median income of $91,880, the highest of any family age group. So statistically, right now at 48, you are at or approaching the highest income you will ever earn in your career. That is genuinely good news. Here is the problem. Peak earnings years are also the most expensive years of most people's lives. The mortgage is at its highest. College tuition is either here or approaching. The lifestyle that expanded with the income has a fixed cost structure that does not respond quickly to intention. And there is something that the financial planning industry calls lifestyle inflation, which is a polite name for what happens when every upgrade you made during the income climb became the new floor you can't seem to drop below without it feeling like regression. The result is that most people at 48 are earning more than they ever have and saving proportionally less than they did in their early 30s, when the number was smaller, but the percentage was higher. Empower analyzed their account holder data and found that Americans in their 40s have an average retirement savings balance of $593,000. The median, which tells you what the middle of the actual distribution looks like, is $220,000. The median, at the peak of their earnings, with potentially the next 15 to 17 years of compounding still available, $220,000 compounded at a 7% real return for 17 years, arrives at retirement worth approximately $650,000. The 4% rule, which is already under serious scrutiny, would give you $26,000 per year from that amount. Add average Social Security of roughly $22,000, you're at $48,000 in annual income. Before taxes, at a time when the healthcare component of your retirement spending has a real chance of exceeding $10,000 annually. You think the problem is earnings. It is not. It is the structural commitment of what you do with them. This is where I want to introduce someone. I'll call him Mark. Mark is 48. He earns $92,000 per year, has $280,000 in his traditional 401k, no Roth account, owns his home, carries no credit card debt, and has $6,000 in a savings account. He genuinely believes he is on track for retirement at 65. Every conventional metric agrees with him. He is contributing 15% to his 401k, including the employer match. He is not a case study in failure. Mark is making 3 structural mistakes that will cost him between $250,000 and $400,000 in lifetime wealth. Not because he is doing anything wrong, because he is doing what was considered correct in 2008, not 2026. We will come back to Mark. His situation resolves at the end. Stay with me, because this next part changes the calculation in a way that most retirement content never actually walks through. Here are the brutal mathematics of compounding time. $1 invested today at a 7% average annual return, which is roughly the historical real return of a diversified, low-cost equity portfolio after inflation becomes approximately $3.38 in 17 years. That is the compounding multiplier you have available right now, assuming retirement at 65. Wait 7 years. Invest at 55 instead. The same dollar becomes approximately $1.75 by 65. Same dollar, half the outcome. You did not make a bad investment. You made a late one. Now scale this up to something that actually reflects your situation. If you increase your annual retirement contribution by $20,000 per year, starting at 48 versus starting at 55, the difference in terminal value at 65 is not $20,000 times 7 years, which is $140,000. Because of compounding, the actual terminal value difference is closer to $450,000 to $500,000. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between comfort and constraint in retirement. And the government has actually built you a legitimate structural advantage for this exact window that most people are not fully exploiting. In 2026, the IRS allows workers aged 50 and older to contribute up to $32,500 per year to a 401k plan, $24,500 in base contributions plus an $8,000 catch-up contribution. That's meaningful. But Secure 2.0 added something that matters specifically for your planning at 48. From ages 60 through 63, the catch-up contribution limit jumps to $11,250 instead of $8,000, which means the maximum 401k contribution for someone in that age band is $35,750 per year. At 63, that window closes and reverts to the standard 50+ limit. Why does that matter at 48? Because the people who can actually max those contributions at 61, 62, and 63 are the people who spent the previous 12 to 15 years building the income margin, the expense structure, and the financial habits that make it possible. If you arrive at 60 and you're barely hitting the standard contribution limit, the super catch-up is a feature that exists for someone else. The runway at 48 determines whether you can use the runway at 62. By the way, hit subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. Otherwise, the algorithm genuinely may never surface this content for you again. This is where I want to thread the sequence of returns risk back into the compounding discussion, because these two ideas are not separate. They are phases of the same problem. At 48, you are in the accumulation phase. Volatility is your friend. A down market means you are buying assets at lower prices. The order of returns does not matter yet, because you're adding to the portfolio and not withdrawing from it. Research confirms this. During your working years, a 20% loss followed by a 25% gain produces roughly the same result as the reverse, because you are not pulling money out. That math inverts completely the moment withdrawals begin. Wade Pfau's research, and this is probably the most important single data point in this video, found that approximately 77% of a portfolio's final retirement outcome can be explained by the returns of just the first 10 years of retirement, not the lifetime average return, the sequence of the first decade. The order of the cards matters more than the value of the hand. A 20% market decline on a $1 million portfolio costs $200,000. The same decline on a $400,000 portfolio costs $80,000. The damage scales with the size of the portfolio. In the first years of retirement, when the portfolio is at its maximum and withdrawals are drawing it down, every market decline causes the most absolute damage it will ever cause. And those losses are compounded by the fact that you are selling assets at the bottom to fund expenses, which means those shares are gone. They cannot participate in the recovery that follows. Two retirees can experience the same average 7% return over 30 years. One runs out of money at year 23, the other has $800,000 left at year 30. The only difference is the sequence of returns in the first decade. This is not a theory. This is the mathematical structure of how portfolios under withdrawal work. Now, connect this to the forced exit data, and the story gets darker. ProPublica and the Urban Institute analyzed the Health and Retirement Study, the premier quantitative database on aging in America, tracking 20,000 people from the time they turned 50 through the rest of their lives. The finding? 56% of stable, long-time employees, people with full-time jobs they had held for at least 5 years when they entered their 50s, were laid off at least once or pushed out under financially damaging circumstances before they voluntarily chose to retire. 56%, more than half. These are not marginal workers. These are the most stable, most secure, most experienced people in the workforce. And an additional 13% departed under conditions suggesting they were effectively forced out but reported it as voluntary retirement to avoid the social stigma. So the real number may be higher. Harvard's Lisa Berkman, who has studied the employment outcomes of older workers extensively, summarized it simply. The 50s are the fork decade. Around half of Americans do not work full-time through them. And of those who leave, the odds of re-entering at a comparable income level in their 60s are low. Let that interact with sequence of returns risk. You plan to retire at 65. The data says there's more than a 50% chance you exit the workforce earlier than planned, laid off at 53, pushed out at 56, health issue at 58. That puts you at the beginning of your withdrawal phase. Somewhere in your early 60s, you begin drawing down your portfolio. A bear market arrives, as it statistically will at some point in any 15-year window. Your portfolio is now simultaneously being drawn down by withdrawals and compressed by market losses. The shares you sell to cover living expenses are sold at the bottom. The recovery that follows grows a smaller portfolio. The sequence is set. The outcome is locked in. The people who survive this scenario are not the ones who got lucky with the market timing. They are the ones who, 7 to 12 years before retirement, built 3 specific buffers that insulated the portfolio from forced selling during downturns. A cash or high-quality bond reserve covering 2 to 4 years of living expenses. A guaranteed income floor, Social Security, a pension if you have one, An annuity if you're comfortable with a structure that covers base living costs so that portfolio withdrawals are supplementary, not survival. And a tax diversified account structure that allows them to pull from Roth or taxable accounts during down market years, preserving the tax deferred accounts and letting equities recover before forced liquidation. None of these three positions can be built in 1 year. They require the 7 to 12 year runway, which at 48, you still have. This is the moment to talk about the math that lives behind the healthcare line item, because it is the most commonly underestimated number in every retirement projection I have ever seen. In 2026, the enhanced ACA premium tax credits that had been available since 2021 expired and were not renewed. The subsidy cliff at 400% of the federal poverty level is back. For a single person, that threshold is approximately $62,600. Earn more than that in a given year, and you pay full price for marketplace coverage. A 63-year-old in many rating areas, which is the age range you could plausibly be in if the forced exit comes early, is looking at benchmark silver plan premiums of $1,400 to $1,500 per month. That is between $16,800 and $18,000 per year in premiums alone. Before deductibles, before copays, before prescription costs. If you leave your job at 61 and Medicare doesn't begin until 65, you are looking at 4 years of private insurance. At those premium levels, that is potentially $68,000 in healthcare premiums across those 4 years, assuming no premium increases, which is heroically optimistic given that medical inflation has historically outpaced general inflation, and only 48% of people reportedly, even explicitly, account for higher healthcare costs in their retirement planning, according to surveys by the National Council on Aging. The health savings account is the structural answer to this problem, and almost nobody is using it correctly. If you have access to a high-deductible health plan and you need to check whether you do, you can contribute $8,550 to a family HSA in 2026. That contribution is tax-deductible, the money grows completely tax-free, and withdrawals for qualified medical expenses come out tax-free. Triple tax advantage. There's no other investment vehicle in the US tax code that gives you deductibility going in, tax-free growth, and tax-free distributions. Not the 401k, not the Roth IRA. Nothing else has all three simultaneously. And after age 65, you can withdraw HSA funds for any purpose at all, not just medical, and simply pay ordinary income tax, which makes the HSA function as a second, smaller IRA if you do not need it for medical expenses. The compounding play is not to use the HSA as a spend-down account for current healthcare costs. The play is to pay your current medical expenses out of pocket if you can afford to, let the HSA compound untouched, and arrive at retirement with $60,000 to $90,000 in tax-free medical reserves that can absorb the insurance gap entirely. Here's the reversal that catches most people off guard. You think the problem is that you have not saved enough money. That is not actually the problem. The problem is that you have almost certainly saved all your money in one tax bucket, the pre-tax 401k, and structured your retirement plan around a set of assumptions about tax rates, exit timing, and market behavior that may be true but may also be catastrophically wrong. The savings number is secondary to the architecture of how those savings are structured and how they interact with the specific risks that activate between 55 and 65. Let me come back to Mark and walk through his 3 structural mistakes in specific terms. Mark's first mistake is the single bucket trap, $280,000, all in a traditional pre-tax 401k. Every dollar will be taxed at ordinary income rates in retirement. Mark's plan assumes he will be in a lower tax bracket in retirement than he is now. That assumption, while conventional, is not guaranteed. When Mark's required minimum distributions begin at 73, the current IRS threshold, he will be forced to withdraw approximately $28,000 in the first year from a portfolio that, assuming he contributed consistently, might be close to $1 million. Add Social Security of around $22,000 annually, his taxable income in retirement is immediately $50,000. His marginal bracket, 22%, which is not dramatically lower than the 22 or 24% he is paying right now during his peak earning years. He deferred income for 30 years and may pay roughly the same rate or higher if tax rates rise to address fiscal pressures, which is not a conspiracy theory. It's an actuarial projection that every budget analyst takes seriously. The window to begin building tax diversification is the next 7 years. A Roth IRA contribution, if eligible, and the income limit for direct Roth contributions in 2026 for married filers is around $236,000 in modified adjusted gross income. A backdoor Roth conversion if income is too high. A modest after-tax brokerage account that produces capital gains instead of ordinary income. The Roth conversion ladder that converts a portion of the traditional 401k to Roth each year, filling the 22% bracket without spilling into 24%. None of these require dramatically different behavior. They require different account structure, which is a decision, not an income level. Mark's second mistake is the liquid buffer gap. $6,000 in savings is not a buffer. It is a rounding error for someone with a mortgage, a family, and a home that will need a roof at some point, which means any unplanned expense, a medical bill, a car, a job gap, gets funded by early 401k withdrawals. At 48, Mark is 11 and a half years away from the penalty-free withdrawal age of 59 and a half. Every dollar he pulls from the 401k before then triggers a 10% early withdrawal penalty plus ordinary income tax. In the 24% bracket, a $30,000 emergency withdrawal costs approximately $10,200 in immediate taxes and penalties. He consumed 34% of that withdrawal before it left the account. The buffer stacks 6 months of living expenses in liquid penalty-free assets is not optional. It is the insulation between a temporary setback and a permanent retirement plan damage event. Mark's third mistake is the unmodeled insurance gap. He has never run the calculation of what health insurance costs if he exits at 61 instead of 65. He has no HSA. He has not priced the ACA marketplace. His retirement projection assumes he works until 65, benefits intact, and transitions cleanly to Medicare. The probability the data assigns to that exact scenario is less than 50%. 3 mistakes, none of them exotic, none of them requiring income Mark doesn't have. All of them correctable from right here, right now at 48. Let me make this tangible with a side-by-side scenario. Karen is 48, $100,000 in household income, $250,000 in a traditional 401k, no Roth, no HSA, a savings account with $5,000. She plans to retire at 65 and contributes 15% of salary to her 401k. Scenario A, Karen changes nothing. At 65, her 401k contains approximately $760,000, assuming 7% average annual returns. She begins withdrawals. Required minimum distributions starting at 73 push approximately $30,000 per year of forced income, taxed as ordinary income. Combined with Social Security, her annual gross retirement income is around $52,000. She nets around $40,000 after taxes and Medicare premiums. Healthcare expenses in the first year of Medicare, Medicare Parts B and D plus supplemental coverage are around $8,000. She has $32,000 of discretionary retirement income. She is technically fine. She hoped for more freedom than this. Scenario B, starting at 48, Karen reallocates $150 per month from discretionary spending into a Roth IRA, $2,400 per year. Not a glamorous number. She also opens an HSA and contributes the maximum annually $8,500 and does not touch it, paying current medical costs out of pocket from her general savings. She builds a 6-month liquid emergency fund of $25,000 over 3 years. She models the forced exit scenario and prices the insurance gap, which motivates her to treat the HSA loading as non-negotiable. By 65, her 401k is slightly lower than scenario A because she redirected some contributions, but she has approximately $75,000 in Roth assets growing tax-free. She has approximately $90,000 in HSA funds that have compounded for 17 years untouched. In years when the market is down, she draws from Roth instead of selling equities at a loss. Healthcare costs in retirement are absorbed by HSA funds rather than portfolio withdrawals, keeping her taxable income low enough to preserve the favorable Social Security tax treatment. The behavioral difference between these two scenarios is about $300 per month in reallocation and a 3-day administrative effort to open the right accounts. The lifetime wealth difference is somewhere between $150,000 and $250,000, depending on market conditions and tax rates. Not because Karen earned more in scenario B, because she structured the same income differently. The decisions compound. The inaction compounds in the opposite direction. Compounding is indifferent to whether you are building or eroding. Now, knowing these numbers and actually building a system around them are two entirely different things. I know this because I had some of this data available to me years ago, and it did not change anything until I had a specific framework, not just the concepts, but the sequencing, the trigger points, and the mathematical targets that tell you when you're actually on track versus just optimistic. That's why I built the Exit Code, which is a digital book that distills 50 years of actual retirement data into a mathematical framework for exiting the workforce on your terms. The two things that connect directly to what we've been talking about today, the chapter on the $14,000 invisible bill, the insurance gap that destroys retirees between 62 and 65, which in 2026 is an even sharper problem since the enhanced ACA subsidies expired, and the dynamic withdrawal method, which is a research-backed replacement for the 4% rule that actually accounts for the sequence of returns, risk window, and adjusts withdrawal rates in real time based on portfolio conditions. 8 chapters, no filler, built on data, not opinion. You can get it for less than one dinner out through the link in the description. And then we're back. Somewhere, there's an influencer telling 48-year-olds to start a side hustle and retire in 36 months. I actually admire the confidence. I personally require data. Here's the closing frame. The average American plans to retire at 66, retires at 61, spends the next 4 years depleting savings faster than projected because the insurance gap, the tax drag, and the sequence of returns damage were never modeled. Wonders what happened. That outcome is not the result of insufficient income. It is the result of structural decisions that were never made during the specific 7 to 12-year window when they could still compound forward. Not because the information wasn't available, because the financial system is not designed to deliver it at the right time. Your employer's benefits documents are not going to flag the sequence of returns window. Your 401k statement does not tell you that 77% of your retirement outcome is determined by the first decade of withdrawals, not the accumulation phase. Your financial advisor, if you have one charging 1% of assets per year, has a structural incentive to make all of this seem manageable and gradual, not urgent and mechanical. So here are 3 practical takeaways calibrated specifically to 48, not to retirement planning in general. First, model the forced exit this week, not in theory with actual numbers. Go to the Social Security Administration's website and look up your projected benefit at 62 versus 66 versus 70. Price health insurance for a 62-year-old without employer subsidy in your zip code through healthcare.gov right now in 2026, that number is likely above $12,000 per year in premiums alone. Run those two numbers against your current retirement projection, assuming you exit at 61. If the math holds, great. If it breaks, and statistically it probably does, you now have a specific dollar figure gap to close and 7 to 8 years to close it. You cannot protect against a risk you have not quantified. Second, build the tax split in the next 3 years. If your current retirement savings are 90% or more in a traditional pre-tax account, you are betting on a single tax scenario in a fiscal environment where that bet is not guaranteed to pay off. Open a Roth IRA or execute a backdoor Roth conversion this year. If your income allows direct contribution, do it. If not, consult a tax professional about the backdoor mechanism. It is legal, well established, and used by millions of high-income earners. You do not need to convert everything. You need to start the Roth account clock because Roth accounts have a 5-year holding requirement. And the earlier that clock starts, the more flexible your access becomes. Building a meaningful Roth balance before 65 gives your future self the ability to choose which account to draw from in any given year, which is the foundation of tax management in retirement. Third, load the HSA like it's your second 401k. If you have access to a high deductible health plan, the HSA is the best pure tax vehicle available to you. $8,550 for a family, fully deductible, tax-free growth, tax-free medical withdrawals, penalty-free general withdrawals after 65. Do not spend it on current healthcare costs if you can possibly avoid it. Let it compound untouched for 17 years. An $8,000 annual contribution compounded at 7% for 17 years arrives at retirement worth approximately $255,000 entirely tax-free for medical expenses. That is your insurance gap fund, built silently over 17 years through automatic compounding. Those three moves model the forced exit, build the tax split, load the HSA, do not require more income. They require reallocation of attention and structure inside the income you already have. And Mark, he ran the forced exit scenario. The math broke at 61, exactly as the data predicted it might. He opened a Roth IRA, started the backdoor conversion process, and enrolled in his company's HDHP to access the HSA for the first time at 48. He still has time. That is the entire point of this video. The escape velocity window is open, not indefinitely, but right now, at 48, it is open. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes, and only 5% of American households have $1 million or more saved for retirement. The window was always there for the other 95%. The architecture mostly wasn't.